Once a year, we do a deep dive on the profile of our average client. You won't hear this information anywhere else. It's a bit shocking. Let's begin.
This is Debt Free in 30. Here's your host, Doug Hoyes.
As required by law, we gather information about each person who files a consumer proposal or bankruptcy with Hoyes and Michalos. Since 2011, we've crunched the numbers to develop a profile of the average consumer debtor who files with us for debt relief. We call this person Joe Debtor, and we do this analysis because we want to know what causes consumer insolvencies. Now, we got very sophisticated computer programs to analyze the data, and it takes a lot of manual work to segregate and clean up the data, which is why you won't find this data anywhere else. We are recording this in early February 2024, and all of the numbers today are based on our filings in 2023, so it's a lot of work in a short period of time to pull this together, but we do it quickly so that the data is fresh. Everyone wants fresh data, right?
Of course, that's the best type of data.
Absolutely. Just as an aside here, the Office of the Superintendent of Bankruptcy does a Canadian consumer debtor profile. I think they started it after we started.
They certainly did
in 2000, but
and
that's
it's
fine.
Not quite as comprehensive.
No, we're happy to have anyone copy our ideas. The most recent one was issued in July 2022, covering the 2021 year. So I think they're a little bit.
So as my grandfather would say, not so fresh.
Not so fresh, exactly. Now, one final point, which is a bit of a bone of contention for me, and that is we call this the Hoyes Michalos Joe Debtor Bankruptcy Study because it's a study, not a survey. We don't hire a polling agency to make 1,000 phone calls and ask people what they're thinking. We crunch the numbers from all of our clients to find out what is actually happening. Wonder why we call it the Hoyes Michalos. John, that's probably just because that's our names. So Ted, welcome back. Let's start by having you explain to the listener when we're talking about consumer insolvencies. What do we mean by consumer insolvencies?
Well, so we're talking about people as opposed to businesses. So you and I are consumers, we're individuals. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's somebody that's got a regular paycheck. You could still be self-employed and own a business, but a consumer insolvency is basically focused on the individual, the family members.
There you go. So we are not talking about business insolvencies. We're talking about consumer proposals and personal bankruptcies. So here is the key headline to all this.
Right.
I'm going to give everyone the end of the story right now. In 2023, consumer insolvencies were way up. I believe we've already talked about this.
That's right. We had the show where we told everyone.
We told everyone, exactly. And they were up, somewhere around 27% in Ontario, which is exactly what you and I predicted.
Right.
More worrisome, average unsecured debt was up almost 10% from the year before, which is the highest year-over-year increase since we started doing this study. So that's not good.
Right.
So, Ted, with that background, what data point do you want to pick on as being the most striking or most interesting in our released Hoyes and Michalos Joe Debtor Bankruptcy Study?
The thing that sticks out the most is the amount of credit card debt. I mean, there was some decrease in lowering of credit card debt levels during the pandemic. All that's behind us now. Credit card debt levels are at the highest they've ever been. And as we predicted, that means that insolvencies are just going to keep increasing.
And in fact, when you draw the lines, and I've shown it before on this broadcast, it's pretty highly correlated.
That's right. There's a bit of a time lag, but I mean, again, if you shift everything, the curves are the same and everything's going up.
Well, and as we record this, the most recent data we have goes up to November of 2023.
Right.
So if you look at the last 12 months in Canada, credit card debt was up 12.35%, which is pretty much bang on what our clients' credit card debt was up.
Which makes sense.
Not surprising as all.
I mean, the scary thing is that we're now up at record levels again. Right?
Yeah, and there is no sign of a top. If you were a stock, looking at this as a stock, it looks like it's got some room to run. Now, if you take all of our clients, 91% of them had credit card debt. That's not a shock to anybody, I don't think.
Right.
And the ones who don't have credit card debt, it's probably someone who maybe just had tax debt or something.
Most likely. Or it was a second bankruptcy, so they didn't have access to credit anymore. Again, it's likely tax debt.
They hadn't rebuilt fully, yeah. So now if we look at just those clients, in other words, we ignore the 9% that didn't have any credit card debt, the average credit card debt was $17,816, so almost $18,000.
Right.
And on average, they had 2.9 credit cards.
Yeah, that actually strikes me as low, but maybe people are learning.
Well, and of course, average means there's some people that are a lot higher. And you can't actually have a 0.9 of a credit card. So.
Well, and anybody that would be in our credit card number, if they had one card, as opposed to the people that have 7, 8, 9, 10.
Yeah.
I mean, we know the folks that have Canadian Tire cards probably have 2, right?
Yes, exactly right. That is the common number, and it has always been that way for that particular card. Now, here's what's interesting, and I'll put up a chart on the screen here. Credit card debt used to be a lot higher. If you go back to when we first did this study in 2011, the average credit card debt of our clients who had a credit card, when you totaled it all up, was $25,500. Right. And then it continued to drop, went all the way down to just under $16,000 in 2022. And then last year, it was, like I said, just under $18,000. So give me your theories on how credit card debt over that 12-year period has dropped so much.
Well, so remember, we're not talking about total credit card debt for the economy. We're talking about persons that found themselves to be insolvent. So credit card debt used to be the single most common form of credit that people could access. I think then there was a shift from credit cards to lines of credit. Anybody who had sufficient income and employment history were able to do that. So they got rid of a couple of credit cards, shifted their debt to lines of credit. So they ended up actually having higher debt overall, but lower credit card debt. Then what we had was a second shift for the folks who couldn't access lines of credit to what we call rapid loans. So that's all the installment loans that are on the internet, the really high interest, really expensive loans.
And payday loans.
Yeah, I knew you were going to say that.
I had to stick that in there. And you're right. If you go back 12 years, a credit card was the primary way to borrow. It was easy to get. Everyone could get one. That's what we used. But then as things matured, it's like, hey, if I can switch this to a line of credit and pay 10% interest instead of 20, I'll do that if my credit is good enough. Right. And then, as you said, the shift over the last 2 or 3 years was to rapid loans. And again, we can see the chart. They were certainly peaking back in 2011. It was a relatively small number, $5,000-$6,000, and now we're up into the $12,000 number. And I mean, well, the show we did last week was last week, week before. I lose track. Was on the change in criminal interest rates. That's going to affect the rapid loan industry. Could have been 2 weeks ago. It's all a blur to me now. Right. But yes, that's a very good point. So all these numbers we're showing you what's happening now, and they're showing you what happened in 2023, and we're going to exactly. So okay, credit cards were an interesting data point, and what else kind of strikes you? Why is it that consumers are going back to credit cards? What else is going on here? So the other big increase last year was in income. So the average income of our clients went up, it wasn't quite 10%, 8.5% or something. 8.6%. Yep. And that's a huge increase. On the surface, you'd think, well, does that mean Canadians are getting paid more? Well, we know that that's not the case. What happened is we've had a shift of the individuals becoming insolvent aren't just all of the younger folks that had no lower income and no assets, and now it's shifting to the mainstream, the family members, the folks that are in their 40s. When we saw that, because the average age is creeping up again, right? Yeah, these are all very good points. So, and again, I'll put the chart up on the screen to quote from the Hoyes and Michalos Joe Debtor Insolvency study, which you can find a link to below in the show notes. Right. joedebtor.ca is where it is. In 2023, the average insolvent debtor's income rose 8.6% to $3,085 a month, while household income rose by 12.8% to $3,600 a month. Right. Meaning there was another member of the household who was also earning some money. This does not mean, however, that Joe Debtor received a raise of 8.6%. As you said, in 2023, we saw fewer low-income filers and more higher-income insolvencies than in prior years. And I think this is a key point. People in filing insolvency have the highest incomes ever, like since we started doing this study, but it's not because our clients got big raises. It's because even if you have higher income, you can't make enough money to survive, and so you end up filing insolvency. 2023 had high interest. You had the inflation rate got crazy. Mortgage rates. I mean, if you renewed last year, you probably were going from a mortgage at 2 or 2.5% to, well, I think today when I checked, the best rate you can getting is 6%. And that's mortgage rates. Obviously, all interest rates have gone up. That's right. And when we look at the debtor income profile, this is an interesting chart because just the shift. And I'll put this chart up as well. So In 2021, people earning between $3,000 and $4,000 a month, this is after tax income,
Yep.
it was about 21% of our clients. Now it's 30%. People earning $4,000 or more a couple of years ago was 10%. Now it's 18%. Whereas people earning at the lower income levels between $1,000 and $2,000 has dropped from 24% to 13%.
Well, just take the top two categories. 2 years ago, it was a third of our clients, and now it's half.
So there you go. And it's because even though you have higher income, you still get into trouble. I will quote again from the Joe Debtor study. Insolvent debtors in 2023 were left with just $273 to pay interest and principal payments on $54,000 in unsecured debt, which is what the average was. The interest alone on this level of debt for the average debtor amounts to more than $1,933 a month. Right. So I've got maybe $300 that I can devote to interest expense after paying my rent, my groceries and everything, but it really cost me almost $2,000.
Right.
And we figured that out by taking a look at, okay, how much do you owe on credit cards? What's the average?
We did a weighted average, right?
A weighted average, exactly right. Yep. So obviously the numbers will not be exactly the same for everyone, but the point is, even with higher income, they can't service their debt.
Right.
Now I got one more point, and this is just a theory because I cannot prove it. But it's my podcast. I can
so you can say whatever you want.
Say whatever I want.
Until they take us off the air.
That's right. Exactly. Till we get banned. So our clients, in addition to having higher income,
right,
also have higher credit scores now.
Sure. Well, that's
than in the past.
And intuitively, that makes sense. If you're going to have higher debt levels, that means you just must have had higher access to credit. The only way to get higher access to credit is to have a higher credit score.
So for all our paid subscribers, we're going to put our team on that and see if we can
figure it out.
Do we have paid subscribers? We don't actually have paid subscribers. This is free. So yeah, they're moving up the income curve, which means they're also moving up the credit score curve.
Right.
So, I mean, we look at a lot of credit reports. We get our clients to get them in most cases because that way we don't miss anything.
Right.
And in a lot of cases, we're not looking at people with credit scores of 400.
Right.
We're looking at a lot of people with credit scores of 700, but they just can't make it work. So that's what's happening today. Now I want to talk about two special cases.
Okay.
And the first one is for you to comment on because you are the car guy.
Got it.
So vehicles. What percentage of our clients had a vehicle at the time they filed their consumer proposal or bankruptcy?
2/3. 2 out of 3.
And of those, what percentage had a financed vehicle?
61% of them.
Okay, so 2/3 of our clients have a vehicle, which means a third don't.
Right.
And in my experience, my clients in Toronto tend to not have a vehicle because you can't afford $200 a month just to park it, let alone the insurance and everything else.
Right.
Whereas if you're living in Kitchener or Guelph or London or Windsor or whatever, it's like, well, I got to have a car to get around. There is no subway.
Right.
So of those 2/3, 61% had a financed vehicle. Now, this is where it gets interesting because you know what has happened to car prices over the last 3 or 4 years.
Right. Both new and used cars have been going up. Right. So the value of a vehicle is higher than it used to be.
And so if I am surrendering my vehicle because I can't afford to pay for it anymore and I'm filing a consumer proposal, I get stuck with the shortfall.
That's right.
What has happened to shortfalls? What has happened to equity values in vehicles over the last, what was happening last year?
Well, so what we found last year was what? The average shortfall in a car was $12,000. Have I got that right?
The average car equity, was a negative
right
of $12,000. The average car debt went up, but the average vehicle value has also gone up.
Right.
So there's two concepts here. One concept is, well, I've got a shortfall in my vehicle, but if I file a consumer proposal or bankruptcy, I can keep it.
You can keep the vehicle, yep.
So long as I keep making the payments.
Right.
Because a consumer proposal or bankruptcy deals with unsecured debts. You can actually keep your car when you file.
That's right. What you're falling back on the whole is cash is king theory, right? So if you clear up your unsecured debts, it leaves you more money available to make payments on things like your car, your rent, your
and
mortgage.
It may be more basic than that. How am I going to get to work?
Right.
I can't take the subway because my shift starts at 5 a.m.
The first question anybody asks us is, can I keep my car?
Right. And the answer is, well, if it's financed and if your payments are up to date, legally, yes, you can keep your car, but you have to keep paying it. So when we do the math, The average car equity last year was, like you said, negative $12,000.
Right.
Now, that does not mean we are including $12,000 in the filing.
Well, in fact, we aren't unless you surrender the car.
Exactly. So of the people who surrendered the car, the shortfall was around $900,
Right.
which is a pretty low number when you look back in history. It's almost always been over 1,000. So a couple of interesting data points here. Non-mortgaged secured debt, which is pretty much going to be a car because that's the main thing,
Right.
is at its highest level ever.
Makes sense.
And it makes sense because car prices are
Buying a new car now is crazy.
It's going to be higher than ever. But the average non-mortgage secured shortfall is the lowest ever.
Right.
And like you said, it's because vehicle values increased.
Yeah, and particularly used vehicle values increased significantly. I think that's about to correct. I mean, it's already started.
I think it's already started. Yeah, because you think back to the pandemic years. Okay, well, we had supply chain shortages, so I couldn't go and buy a new car. Whatever cars were there, they cost more, plus interest rates were lower.
Right.
So I could afford to buy more car. But I agree. I think we've turned the corner on that. Values are dropping. And so I'm predicting we're going to see significantly higher vehicle shortfalls in 2024 and beyond.
I think that's a safe bet.
And that will probably drive an increase in insolvencies because there'll be some people who go, you know what, I'm giving up my car. Oh, I'm in the hole $20,000. Well, I guess I have to file then because I can't service that.
Right.
Now, the other topic, of course, which everyone likes to discuss, is homeowners.
Mm-hmm.
So right now, we have very few homeowners who are filing an insolvency.
That's right.
And it's somewhere around 4%. Like it's not a big number of our clients.
So it was 4% for last year anyway,
for
right?
for 22. And of course, we publish the number every month. It goes up and down. You can go to Hoyes.com and just type in Hoyes Michalos Homeowners Bankruptcy Index, and you can see the number. And you remember back around 2011, it was about a third of our clients.
Right.
And then there was a point in 2022 when it got to zero, and then it's kind of creeped up into that 3, 4, 5% range now. Why was it a third many years ago, and then why did it get down to zero?
Well, the getting down to zero is easier to explain. I mean, when the real estate market has done some very strange things over the last decade or so. It just keeps, if you bought a house, it's going to go up in value. That's just the way everybody thought. And your carrying costs were very low because the interest rates were, it was free money. You were paying 1.5%, 2% on a mortgage. Yeah,
you couldn't lose.
Right.
Like it was guaranteed money. So even if I bought the worst house in the worst neighborhood and I got the biggest mortgage I possibly could, put the smallest down payment down I could, 2 years later, the house was worth $100,000 more than I paid for it.
Right. So if you go back to when we started this, 2011?
Yep.
The market wasn't doing those crazy things at that point. So you couldn't just refinance your house or sell your house to get out of debt. You had more debt than you can handle. So now, because of what's happened in the real estate market, that's not necessarily true.
Yeah. So 10 years ago, someone would come in to see us. We do the math and we go, okay, well, your house is worth $300,000. You got a $250,000 mortgage on it. And if you were to sell it and pay the real estate commissions, there's a second mortgage and you have there's $10,000 worth of equity.
Right.
So you know what? We'll do a consumer proposal. We'll offer $20,000. You keep your house. Everything's great. Whereas last year or the year before when someone was coming in to see us, we go, we did the math and there's $500,000 worth of equity in your house.
Right. So now if you do a consumer proposal, you got to give them all the money plus the fees plus,
So it doesn't make sense. You might as well refinance your house or whatever, which is why very few homeowners are filing. But there's some interesting numbers here. Mm-hmm. So all of our debtors, we already said this number, have about $54,000 worth of unsecured debt.
Yeah, so folks, that's credit cards, income tax, rapid loans, payday loans. It's basically unsecured debt.
Unsecured debt, exactly right. Now, most of our clients are not homeowners, but if you factor out the homeowners, that number goes down a little bit. It's 51,000. Okay, basically the same number. Yep. But if you just look at homeowners, how much unsecured debt did they have last year?
It's almost $100,000.
Almost $100,000.
So double.
Almost double what our typical client has or our renter would have. In addition to that, if you look at their credit card debt, so somebody who owns a home versus somebody who doesn't, well, we already said that credit card debt was around $18,000.
Right.
For someone who owns a home, their credit card debt is
$33,000.
Way higher. So almost, again, twice as much,
Which makes
1.9 times as high.
Yep.
And does that make sense? Why is that?
I mean, it makes sense to me because the homeowners probably have higher income, higher credit scores. They've got asset-based lending to secure all of this stuff against. They're perceived to be a better credit risk, so they have access to more credit.
I think it's as simple as that. They are perceived to be, because if you go into the bank and say, hey, I'd like a $10,000 credit card and I don't own anything, they're going, gee, that's kind of risky. But hey, look, I got this $1 million home. Okay, fine. You're stable.
Right.
You're never going to default. The average non-mortgage secured debt.
So car loans.
Let's call it car loans. That would be the biggest category. For our non-homeowners, about $9,500. How much is it for a homeowner?
$33,000.
That's way higher.
Yeah. My theory is either they've got more expensive cars or more likely they've got multiple cars.
And as a result, they have more secured debt.
Correct.
So when you add all those things together, the average unsecured debt plus the non-mortgage secured debt, the average homeowner has like twice as much non-mortgage debt as the renter. Kind of makes sense. The percentage of non-homeowners with student loan debt of our clients is around 24%, 24%.
Yep.
What is the percentage of homeowners who have student loan debt?
About 15%.
So lower.
And that makes sense because if you've got student loan debt, you probably can't afford a mortgage payment.
So you pay off your student loan debt or get it to a manageable level, and then you're in a position to buy a house. Or my parents are giving me the money to buy the house. I guess my parents can probably clean up my student loan, or they paid for my education anyways.
Right.
So there's obviously a pretty big divide there between renters and homeowners. The homeowners are able to get more unsecured debt, but they also have less student loan debt to start with.
Right.
What about tax debt?
Well, so the interesting thing is the homeowners have more tax debt. And I guess that makes sense too, because we're saying that they probably have higher on average income than our average Joe debtor. And a significant number of them are going to be self-employed. And so the self-employed are almost always have more tax debt than the paycheck guys.
And we haven't done a deep dive to fully analyze that, but that makes perfect sense to me. So there is definitely a big difference between a homeowner and a renter in terms of what they're able to borrow. And for the last few years, it's been great because my house has gone up in value. It's all been good. But now that we've seen prices stabilize or in some markets starting to fall because interest rates are so much higher, that's a big deal.
Yeah. And I think this homeowner percentage is going to climb significantly this year and probably into next.
And we might be in a 5-year cycle of rising. The average insolvent homeowner last year had just $42,000 in home equity, which is less than half their unsecured debt. Okay, well, that's why they're coming to see us, obviously.
Correct.
At just 7% of their home value, they have insufficient home equity to refinance, and as a result, file a consumer proposal to deal with their unsecured debt. Well, that makes sense. Like you said, that's why the numbers are going up.
Yep.
Okay, so let's wrap this up here. People filing bankruptcy and consumer proposals are not who you think. That's why we do this broadcast, because people think, oh, well, the reason someone's going bankrupt is they don't have a job, they're homeless, they're unemployed,
disabled, whatever. They're in some kind of government assistance.
There's some problem. And the answer is, well, no. 82% of our clients last year were employed at the time they filed.
Right.
You go back to 2021, and we all remember what was happening back then. It was only 70% then, because, of course, lockdowns and all sorts of other stuff has happened. So a lot more of them are employed. Only 6% are unemployed. Mm-hmm. And in most cases, they're unemployed, but they're looking for a job, and they'll probably be back to work shortly.
Yeah. So they're in between employment as opposed to.
Exactly. And, the rest of to add up to 100%, the rest are either retired or on disability, but that's a pretty small percentage.
Right.
So because they're employed, their incomes are higher, but their debts are also higher.
Correct.
So even people with higher incomes are having trouble keeping up.
And that just makes sense, right? Between the inflation and the interest rate increases last year, everybody's having a hard time making ends meet.
So our prediction in our year-end show was that insolvencies would be going up.
That's right, another 25 to 30% this year.
And when you look at these numbers, it's like, yeah, I think that's pretty much exactly what they show.
Yeah, there's nothing on the horizon that gives us any hope that those numbers are going to decrease.
Sorry, we're just reading the numbers, and I agree. Why? Well, expenses are rising faster than incomes.
Right.
We know that there was a period of time last year, about 5 or 6 months, where the inflation rate was 10%.
Yeah, and that's just crazy.
And nobody, now of course it's come down since then, and of course I'm on record as saying it's going to be 0% by the summer. So
I'm not agreeing with that.
We're all going to have a good laugh at me when that one doesn't come true, although I'm still sticking with it.
Right.
But the point is, okay, the inflation rate has come down, but that doesn't mean prices have come down.
No. So they're not going up as fast.
They're not going up as
That's
fast.
what it
That's
means.
all it
That's
means.
Right.
And incomes, of course, have not gone up anywhere near as fast as expenses have gone up. And then, of course, we got higher interest rates.
Right. I mean, use the example. The average Canadian mortgage is $500,000. At 2.5%, I think your monthly payment's $2,400. At 6%, which is the best rate I could find this morning, your monthly payment is $3,400. So $1,000 a month more. And you certainly didn't get an increase of that in your pay.
And we're just making these numbers up. You guys can all go to the online mortgage calculator and punch in the exact numbers.
Yep.
But there's no dispute. It's a higher number.
A significantly higher number.
Significantly higher. And if your mortgage was 5 years locked in 3 years ago, I guess it hasn't affected you yet.
Right.
But we're getting close to the crunch time for a lot of people.
Yep.
For the last 3 years, vehicle prices were going up. So great. Easier to get out of a car loan with interest rates up and vehicle prices not increasing so fast or falling. Well, more insolvencies caused by that. And then, of course, we already just talked about it. There were fewer homeowner insolvencies. We think that number is going to go up. So the point is, it is not the poor people who are going insolvent. It's what we used to call the middle class.
That's right.
I don't know if that's even a thing anymore, because we got the super rich and everybody else.
I remember that's what the government's always done. There are 3 segments of Canadian economy. The third at the top that are in great shape, the third in the middle that are getting by, and then the bottom third are really already in trouble.
And that bottom third is what we're talking about here. And unfortunately, there are people going into that bottom third.
Right. The middle third is, at some point, we hope it never happens. The middle third gets divided into the top and the lower, and they're just gone.
Yeah.
That's your middle class.
And that's kind of where it's going. And the top is going to be like 2% and everybody else. And that seems to be where it's heading. So do you have any final thoughts on all this? So, okay, we do these numbers to let people know what's happening. What does it all mean? What do you take away from this?
Well, the thing for everybody to keep in mind is that while your own experience is unique, you're not going through this alone. There are a significant number of Canadians that suffer financial difficulty every year. I mean, I think this year it'll be 130 to 140,000 people declare themselves to be insolvent. That's a huge number. I mean, it's 1 out of every 9. At least that's where it's going to end up. So if you're experiencing difficulty, reach out to somebody. We do this for a living, so obviously we'd like you to call us, but talk to your accountant, talk to your lawyer, talk to whomever you get your financial advice from. Don't internalize this, because debt problems don't go away.
Yeah, and you do think you're alone because, well, my friend is driving a fancy car and he's got a house and it's all great.
And it's all financed.
It's all financed, yeah. And like, how many people go in and buy a $50,000 car with cash? I'm guessing it is not a significant percentage of the population. How many people have a house with no mortgage? Well, there's lots of them. They're all 70 years old, but there are lots of them. But the person you are comparing to yourself to, I totally agree with you. They've probably got a bunch of debt.
And be careful. I mean, you want to keep up with your neighbors, but not to the point where it gets you into financial trouble.
Yeah. In fact, I don't really care what my neighbors are doing. I'm going to keep up with myself. I know that I've got these goals. I want to put my kids through school. I want to retire. I want to buy a new pair of shoes, whatever it is. And that's all I'm focused about.
Right. The only one who really cares about you is you.
Right. I'm competing with myself, not anybody else. So don't worry about what everyone else has. If I can have a few extra bucks in the bank, that would be great. And nobody knows how much I got in the bank.
Right.
And even my credit report doesn't reflect how much money I've got in the bank. So focus on things that are, I think, more important. That's why we do this show. And again, I will repeat Ted's commercial. If you are suffering through this, yes, by all means, you want to reach out to a licensed insolvency trustee, not some dude on the internet with no qualifications or anything like that. Talk to an expert and they can walk you through the options. Ted, thank you very much for being here. You can find our full report. There'll be a link in the show notes, but you can also just punch in joedebtor.ca and find it. Read all the numbers for yourself. As you know, we have a new show every Saturday morning. It's on video on YouTube, and the audio version is on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and I'm sure you listen to it on Google or something. I don't know. You're a high-tech guy. It's on all the podcasting apps, so please like, subscribe, leave a comment, and hit the notification button so you can be notified of each new show. I don't know why they say hit the button. Like you just click it.
Well, that's right. In fact, if you hit it, you're going to do bad
Well,
things.
yeah,
It's a brass contact, right?
But that's what all the podcasters say. And I want to be cool. So I'm telling you to hit the button. That is our show for today. Thanks for listening and watching. Until next week, I'm Doug Hoyes. That was Debt Free in 30.